Nice to see a full audience today for our fourth talk of our Wealth and Poverty Week. This year our theme for Wealth and Poverty Week is Action on Inequality. We had some great talks so far this semester, and we still have two more coming up this week. Tomorrow, September 27th, we have Jennifer Simon, who's going to be talking about finding pathways out of poverty for the isolated Appalachian population. That's at 5 p.m. in the same room. And then on Friday, September 28th, Berkeley Franz is going to be talking about clinical care or community development. What role should hospitals play in urban neighborhoods? That's at 1 o'clock p.m. on Friday in the same room as well. I'm Rachel Turman. I'm assistant professor in sociology and anthropology here at Ohio University. I'm also a core faculty member in the Wealth and Poverty theme. And if you don't know already, our theme offers a Wealth and Poverty certificate, and we have flyers with all the information about that certificate in the back of the room right where you come in through the door. So for those of you who are interested in topics of wealth and poverty and just inequality broadly, you might think about picking up a certificate as part of your coursework. You may have already taken some of the necessary classes for this certificate, so take a look and see if this might be of interest to you. My main job up here today is to introduce our speaker, who is Kerri A. She is the social work field director at Ohio University and has been a field liaison for over 5 years. She oversees both undergraduate and graduate students' field placements across the Athens and regional campuses. She also serves as the Community Health Worker Training Program Director through the College of Health Sciences and Professions. Previously, Ms. Shaw practiced social work both in both Athens and Washington County school districts for nearly 10 years and developed the Peanut Butter and Jelly Project, which continues to feed thousands of children in Athens County each summer. She received the title 2014 Athens Foundation Woman of the Year, which I think is a super cool title to have, and has been recognized both at the university and in the community for her activism and efforts towards social justice. She received a BS in social work and an MSW in social work administration, both from Ohio. So please join me in welcoming Kerri Shaw.
Hi, everybody. So I've already been introduced, so I won't introduce myself. And many of you know me. So for those of you who don't know me, I would like to hear where you're coming from and what brings you here today. Just briefly, if anyone would like to volunteer that information so I know who my audience is who is not in the social work program. Anyone want to share what you're studying, what brought you here today? Yes?
I'm a global studies student, and I got an email about this lecture, and it sounds really interesting because inequality is something we talk about in like the global south, but also as like right here.
Absolutely. Great. Thanks. Anyone else want to share? Okay. So as Rachel said, I practiced school social work for about 10 years. I was in the Washington County schools working under a homeless children and youth grant for about 2 years plus an internship. And so during that time I worked with a lot of children who were living in a shelter or who were highly mobile, who maybe were doubled up with a family member because a parent was incarcerated or something like that. When I worked in Trimble, I was at the Trimble Elementary Middle School, and that was a program that came out of Athens County Children's Services. So it's a school outreach program that places folks out in the schools that are kind of embedded in the schools as school social workers or school outreach workers. So when I was there, Trimble was identified as the poorest school district in the state of Ohio based on property taxes. So if that gives you kind of a picture of what the school district was like, it was pretty low income. It was a consolidated elementary middle school, and I was there full time. And I always thought I could have the whole school on my caseload at one time or another because there were just a lot of needs in that area. But today we're not really here to talk about the needs. We're here to talk about a kind of a different perspective on working with people. And this is based on the risk and resiliency model. That's who I am. So today we're going to learn about the concepts of resiliency and promotive factors or protective factors. I'll describe what is resiliency theory and apply resiliency theory to children in our county, and also identify ways to promote resiliency. And these are my kids' boots. So I have permission to share his photo. So what do we know about the children in Athens County? We know that there are close to 10,000 children and youth under the age of 18. Most of them are concentrated in Athens, and then there are several smaller villages out in the county. There are about 29% of children in Athens County who are living in poverty. That's a huge number. That's close to 1 in 3 of our children are living in poverty in this county, all right? So that's much, much higher than the state average. More than half of those children qualify for free and reduced price lunch. Full disclosure, when I was a child, I grew up in a family that my parents were blue-collar workers. They worked in factories, and when my mother would get laid off, we would qualify for free and reduced lunch. So that's part of the reason that I'm a social worker today, that I definitely have been on the other side of living in poverty and feeling what that was like, and so I feel like I have a lot of empathy for families that struggle. About 1 in 5 Athens County residents are estimated to be food insecure. What does that mean? What does food insecurity mean? I'm sure that this is not the first time you've heard this term. Social work students, especially. Yes?
Does it mean they just don't have like proper food, like nutritional, that like proper nutritional value and stuff?
It can mean that. That's definitely part of the definition. What else? Yes?
I think we're referring to not knowing where your next meal is coming from.
Exactly, not knowing where your next meal is coming from. And along with that, that it possibly might not meet your nutritional needs. And then 14% of Athens County residents are low income and live more than 10 miles from a grocery store. So you can imagine that that kind of exacerbates a lot of problems when we know that in rural areas, transportation can be a big issue. And 17% of our residents receive SNAP benefits. So those last 3 items are include adults, but that gives you a picture of what the families that we work with are looking like. So what is resiliency theory? Resiliency theory is a strengths-based approach. And those of you who are social work students are very familiar with this term, but those of you who aren't might not know what a strengths-based approach means. Anyone want to take a stab? It means that we're not looking at the deficits as much, right? We are looking at what's going well, what's working, and this is a framework that tells us what about adolescents and children can we work on and improve their circumstances, right? What do they already have, either as an asset or a resource, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that can help them succeed. So resiliency theory supplies the conceptual scaffolding for studying and understanding why some youth grow up to be healthy adults in spite of risks exposure. Raise your hand if you know someone who's been through so much adversity and had so many struggles in their lives, but they are still amazingly successful people in whatever way we want to define that. Absolutely. Does anyone want to share a story about someone who comes to mind in this situation? They could be a famous person. Like, I think about Dolly Parton, you know. I see some nods, right? Like, Dolly Parton grew up in poverty in Appalachia, and now she's sending millions and millions of books to children in her community, and sending lots and lots of money, dollars, to families who've suffered. So resiliency, just because you grow up poor, doesn't mean that you're set up for failure, right? There are factors built in that can help people succeed. And this is a framework that helps us design interventions around that perspective, okay? So resiliency theory focuses attention on positive contextual, social, and individual variables that interfere with or disrupt developmental trajectories from risk to problem behaviors, mental distress, and poor health outcomes. This means that these negative events could be happening, but people are able to bounce back. There are also some theories that believe that sometimes having some of those stressors when you're a child or adolescent actually make you more resilient, as long as they happen within a certain context, right? So that that they're not creating so much stress and trauma that you aren't able to bounce back, but they can actually kind of develop your ability to be flexible and adaptable. So these variables are called promotive factors. All right. Any questions on that? That's the theory piece. So what is resiliency and what is a risk factor? Resiliency is an adaptive, stress-resistant personal quality that allows an individual to thrive despite unfortunate life experiences. It's not a static state of being over time. So what does that last sentence mean? Yeah?
They might struggle to cope with, issues from their past or present for a time being, but eventually they'll restabilize.
It can mean that, yes. So it changes, right? Sometimes they might have stronger coping mechanisms than others, but it doesn't mean that someone who is not resilient in one part of their life is not going to be resilient in another area or time period. A risk factor could be something like poverty, low parent education, poor cultural identity, instability or discord, alcoholism, substance abuse, and violence in the family. So these are things that can affect our young people and affect their resiliency, right? And what we see is a very strong relationship between risk and resiliency. We can increase resiliency in children and young people, and that's why we're here today, is to talk about that. Risk factors are sometimes harder to manage, and sometimes there are a lot of external factors that we don't always have control over. Any questions on that? So this is going to get a little more interactive here in a moment. We know that children in poverty face a lot of risks. And we also know that we have a lot of children in poverty in Athens County, right? So what can we do about this? One really important piece of this is that we have a lot of recent evidence that suggests that poverty negatively impacts brain development as well. So it's not just affecting social and emotional and behavioral outcomes, but also affects their long-term brain development and how they cope with situations in their lives. Okay. This is the part that's really, really neat. The right-hand column are some examples of assets, and the left-hand column is examples of resources. What do you think is the difference? What makes something an asset and what makes it a resource?
An asset is internal within the child, and the resource is external.
Absolutely, yeah. So I come with my assets, right? And the resources are things that other people might provide for me. So some of the assets that we find in children are self-efficacy. So self-efficacy means that they believe that they have control over the outcomes around the world. And we talk about something called an internal or an external locus of control. When you have an internal locus of control, it means that you believe that you cause things to happen, right? Positively or sometimes negatively too, but that you can correlate events in your life to your own behavior. And what that means is sometimes you can be proud of what you do, right? And it also means that you can be responsible for what happens to you and feel that responsibility. External locus of control sometimes means that you blame others, you don't take responsibility. And you also kind of play the victim sometimes, or behave as a victim. Feel that you're a victim. Next is self-esteem. We've probably all had times in our life when we've had high self-esteem and low self-esteem. Being Athens Foundation Woman of the Year, pretty cool thing, right? but that's not everyday life, right? Temperament is the ability to adjust or recover from ability to adjust or recover, and also emotional regulation. So this kind of is connected to that resiliency notion that you have things happen to you, but you can roll with it. You can be flexible, right? You can adapt. There is some evidence that gender is related to resiliency, which is really interesting. That girls oftentimes have they're better at using their support systems in positive ways. And so what that means is that they can be more resilient because they are using their support systems. Whereas boys, and these are generalizations, and we can do lots more research about this, but boys sometimes have more maladaptive coping. Oh, I see Zach nodding his head back there. So boys tend, when they're in a stressful situation, tend to do things like avoid, all right? And avoiding it's not a helpful or healthy process usually. So sometimes gender can be related to resilience. The ability to receive social support. So this is a really interesting qualifier, that it's not just that you have social support, but it's that you know how to use it, right? Like, I think about clients that I've had who have like a huge family, but they're not really good at asking for what they need or connecting with people when they need something. I see nods. So as social workers, especially, cultivating using that social support can be a way that we can help families, right? And then the ability to enjoy social interactions. I think that's an interesting one. Why do you think that would be a factor that would affect your resiliency? Yeah.
If you don't enjoy social interactions, you might isolate yourself, which would then make it difficult to utilize your social supports.
Absolutely, yeah. It also makes you likable, which is a really hard word to hear. But you know, when you're able to interact with people, then you grow your social support, right? Because people enjoy being around you. And so, especially for young people, I have a young person in my life who has lived in poverty her whole life, but she has gone through school being adored by teachers because she has this dynamic personality, right? She does fine in school, but she's not like the shining star academically, but she is so socially engaging and funny that she's built her support system at school, right? And so this is something that we can pay attention to and look at as a resiliency factor, okay, or a promotive factor. Any questions on that? Are the gears turning about how you're working with people and how this fits in? Okay. So resources are those external supports or external factors. Parental support is huge. That's no surprise. But what does it mean to have parental support? It can mean warmth and cohesion. It does not mean having really, really strict parents. There's definitely a correlation with parenting styles, and having parents that are warm, cohesive, and flexible and communicative about their parenting and limits and disciplining is helpful, beneficial. Adult mentors, we have some great mentoring programs in the community. Adult mentors make a huge difference in children's lives, and we'll talk about that in a second too. Youth programs that provide youth with opportunities to learn and practice skills. What would be examples of those?
Kids on campus.
Kids on campus. What kind of skills are they learning there?
Not terribly familiar, but learning skills how to do their homework.
Yeah,
could be
that's a skill.
option, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What else? Yeah. Oh. Yes.
I know the Dairy Barn does a lot of youth programs.
Mm-hmm. So art skills, self-expression, creativity.
4-H.
4-H, good one, because that is something that is pretty inherent to rural areas, right? We don't see a whole lot of 4-H in downtown Columbus, but down here, a lot of our children participate in 4-H. And why is it, what kind of skills do kids learn in 4-H?
Really, anymore, they can learn pretty much anything from like agricultural skills, they can learn leadership skills. It just depends on what their interests are and where they want to focus.
Mm-hmm.
There's projects for a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then opportunities as well for like public speaking and stuff.
Absolutely. Opportunities for public speaking, opportunities for relationships with different adults in their life that are outside of school or home. Mm-hmm. There is another hand back here. Sir?
I said Girls Rock Camp.
Girls Rock Camp. Anyone familiar with Girls Rock Camp? What do you know about it?
I think a few summers ago I helped volunteer teach beginning guitar course.
All right, so girls are learning, girls and gender conforming youth are learning musical instrument skills, right? How to play an instrument, how to write songs, how to work together. Yeah, so those are good examples of programs that are happening in our community where kids are learning to practice skills. So that also helps them feel more confident in themselves, right? It's not just about academics, but they're learning more holistic skill base. High expectations. So this is really something that setting the bar in schools and at home and helping children have some goals, right? That I know you can do better, I have faith in you, those kinds of messages to children. And then a message that culture is an asset. Why is that important? I know Sarah's like so excited about that one. And it was really interesting to read about this as well.
I think it provides a sense of belonging and a sense of community within oneself and their external community.
Yeah, some pride, right? Yes, absolutely. Any questions about those? So you can see what assets are and resources are and how they differ. Okay, now comes the interactive part. What I would like for you to do is find a partner. I'm going to do a pair share and answer these questions. If resiliency is defined as the ability to bounce back from and successfully overcome risks and adversity, why are you a resilient person? You are all here in a college library, all right? I'm assuming that you're part of the educational system in some way, shape, or form, or have been in your past. How'd you get here? What did you overcome? What's made you resilient? What are some of the struggles or challenges that you've faced in the past or currently? Disclose what you want. You don't have to disclose, your deepest, darkest secrets. That's your information to share. And how did you overcome these? What did you do? What beliefs about yourself or others guided you? And who helped you? How did they help, and what else helped you? Okay? So we'll take about, let's see, how about 10 minutes? So we'll do 5 minutes, maybe less than that. We'll try for 10 minutes. So we'll do 5 minutes and then switch. And so one person will go for 5 minutes, the other person will listen, and then we'll switch. Okay? Great. I'll set my timer.
So resilience.
Okay, that was 5 minutes for the first group. Did you all, sorry, did you feel like 5 minutes was long enough, too long? Yeah? Long enough or too long?
Long enough.
Okay, so we'll do 5 more minutes for the next pair. 5 minutes is not long enough to talk about our rich backgrounds. Can you all come back together? Okay. Thank you. Well, that seemed really engaging. Would anyone like to share a snippet of their story and answer maybe one of the questions from this list? You don't have to. It's okay. Raise your hand if you had somebody who was really significant in nurturing and encouraging you as a young person who was outside of your immediate family. Anyone want to tell us who that person was or what they did that was outstanding, that is memorable to you? Yeah.
I had a really good influence from my sports coaches, like through high school. They really helped me get through a lot of stuff.
Nice. Yeah, good example. Sports coaches spend a lot of time with young people, don't they? So you can really develop strong relationships with them. Anyone else? Well, thank you all for sharing with your partners, because it seemed like there were some really great conversations happening. I was thinking about Dolly Parton again, and thinking about not knowing her story in depth at all, but what do you think she did have, just knowing what we do know about her from this list? Yes. She is likable, isn't she? Absolutely. She's a great example of that.
I think she has a positive temperament.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I don't see her get really riled up, do you? She's pretty even keel. Seems pretty flexible. She's a woman. I was also thinking about the ability to practice skills. Somebody cultivated music in her, right? And so that's a really good example of how something like that can transform a young person when they have opportunities. I think about rock camp, that some of those young people who come to rock camp have never played an instrument before, but they're interested. And so that's such a resource for our community to give that opportunity to young people to practice and learn, right? And so when we think about what's out there for kids in in rural areas, it's important to think about where are the gaps and how can we get young people connected to what is out there, and how can we advocate for what we need and what our young people don't have, especially when I think about learning and practicing skills and developing adult relationships with adults. Okay, so what can we change? These are a few of the components that we do have an impact on. Brain development. We know that 90% of a young person's brain is developed by the time they're 3 years old. So early childhood programs are very, very, very important. Parenting. We can help people be good parents, right? We can learn about evidence-based models and do a lot of role modeling when we're around young children, so that we're helping people be better parents. We can also, and this is the wonderful thing about having a university in this community, is that we can focus on professional competence about the impact of poverty and skills to reduce negative effects. So that's why it's really important that, yes, social workers, we are experts on poverty, but there are lots of other disciplines out there where poverty affects people's interactions with young people and with community members, right? So it's just as important for teachers to understand how this model and how growing up in poverty affects young people and what they can be doing. So education is another area where this is an important model to apply this to. And then child-adult relationships. Any questions on that? So these are things that we have an impact on, especially living in this community and working with people. I know like half of you are doing internships right now and field placements. So these are things that you can be putting into practice. What's happening in Athens County already? we have school-based mental health services and school-based social workers, right, or school outreach program activities. Who can tell me what does that have to do with resilience? Why would having those services in schools be helpful?
Transportation and stigma is a barrier.
Okay, access, right. We're in a rural area, we need access to services. What else? Yes?
It also encourages kids to take that action of accessing services. So if it's after school, they can use the school as their resource instead of having to rely on a specific mental health agency location.
Right. So it could maybe even be connected to self-efficacy or having some, that locus of control, right? Connected back to those assets and resources that we're thinking about. Why are these beneficial programs? Food programs. Live Healthy Appalachia, who's familiar with that program? What are they doing that makes them unique with young people?
Do they have the Discovery Kitchen, or is that a different program?
I don't know about the Discovery Kitchen.
I think that's where they show kids like different types of food and let them prepare it themselves and like give access to new and different types of plant-based food.
So they're teaching skills, right? They're teaching kids how to take care of themselves, how to prepare their own meals. If they're interested in food and nutrition, they're giving them exposure to that. Were you going to say something, Rachel?
That would be what I would say.
Yeah, they're also bringing another person into the school, right? Another mentor into the classroom to connect with those young people. Mentoring programs. What are the mentoring programs do we have in this community?
Big brothers or big sisters.
Big brothers, big sisters. And what do they do? Mentor, you can't. What does mentoring mean, though? What makes someone a mentor?
You spend positive time with them, doing
Yes.
something positive.
And it's over time, right? It's not a one-time shot. It's not an in and out. They ask for a commitment of 1 year at least, right? And that's because that's evidence-based, that a relationship with a young person, if it lasts over time like that, can affect change, can increase their resiliency. But we need to be committed to what we're doing, right? Yeah.
I was just going to add that Integrated Services now has adult peers who are recovering addicts. And so they work with people that are struggling with substance abuse. It's a really great program, but it's definitely, the peer mentoring is just showing them how to live their daily life healthy, make different decisions.
Nice.
So they're showing by example.
Right. Excellent. And like we talked about earlier, resiliency is not static, right? It changes. So that means that we can change it over time too, and we can help people become more resilient, not just children, but adults as well. Thank you, Susan. Early childhood programs, why are they important? First 3 years, right? So the more of those that we have, the stronger our children can be, the more impact we can have on those really critical years of development. University-sponsored family events. The university is a resource in our community, right? And it's a resource to you as students, and it's also a resource to our community and our families out in our community. What are some things that you know that bring people onto campus? Kids on Campus has been named. What else happens here that brings folks here? Kid Fest. Whew. Yeah, that's a whole lot of kids coming to campus from all over the county, right? And so they're getting some really neat enrichment activities and nutrition and exercise and connection to agencies. What else? Rachel?
Music, like you can go to free musical events, like the orchestra or the university-sponsored programs.
Yes. Yes, for sure. Lots of free activities available to families. So, if we can encourage families to participate in those things, not all families have money to go to the movies on the weekends, right? But if there's something happening on campus that's available, they're welcome to come, which is a fantastic resource for us and for our families. It's also a way for families to spend positive time together, right? For that, like just because you're poor doesn't mean you can't have fun together. I mean, that is just fundamental. And so figuring out ways to make that happen. Kelly, do you want to talk about some things happening at Community Action around these programs?
Youth-specific stuff?
Yeah, or a family.
Yeah, so we run Head Start programs. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Head Start. We have a center down on Richland Avenue where we serve kids age 3 to 5. And then there's also a home-based program called Early Head Start where a home visitor comes into the home and kind of turns their home into a classroom and models that positive parenting and kind of monitors those developmental milestones for the kids too. And that's for women who are pregnant for age 2, so that even if a mom's expecting, she can start to learn those developmental milestones early on and be prepared. So yeah, so Head Start and Early Head Start, I would say those are our two.
What about your youth employment?
Oh yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if we were talking early.
Not just early.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we also run some summer employment programs. So in the summer months, we'll hire low-income kids age like 14 to 24 is kind of the target. And then we place them at work sites throughout the community. So they're able to like give back to their own community, earn a paycheck, which is really critical income for families, especially in the summer months. And then they also like have that pride in like earning that paycheck, building employment skills, soft skills, just like how to show up to work on time. Like the number one thing employers say that employees don't have is those soft skills. You can train anybody to do anything, but if they can't show up to work, can't pass a drug test, that's not. So anyway, those are the types of things we do in that summer employment program. And just today we had a new employee orientation for folks from all the different divisions we have. And one woman, I asked people to kind of talk about where they had come from. And she was a summer employment worker back in like 2013. And then the work site she was at hired her. She worked her way through college, and now she's working as a center-based teacher in our Athens Head Start Center. So it's just an example of kind of like being able to, what I try to tell staff is like every interaction is an opportunity to change somebody's life. And so anyway, it's a couple of things we do.
Thank you. She's not a plant, folks. Great example. So any other like gaps or things that are happening out there that you're aware of that we didn't mention that might be really, yes, Sarah.
I think that the CASA GAL program is a big piece and also good for people to know because it's something that folks can get involved in as a volunteer, just as a community member, but serving as a guardian ad litem or as a court-appointed special advocate for kids who are in the foster care system.
Excellent. Yeah. Anything else that we didn't mention, Julie?
I'm not as familiar with Athens County, but I'm in Washington County, and I assume you guys have them here, but after-school programs have been a really good resource for some of my case management clients for kids that need a little bit of more help in the classroom or even just need a safe place to go when their parents are still working after school.
Excellent. Yeah. All right, so those are external resources, right, that we have here in the community. I would love to have a discussion about what kinds of things we could do better and how, but we only have about 10 minutes left. Are there questions or comments? Yeah.
I guess just regarding the topic that we're maybe foregoing, I think it's really great that we hear about all those programs that the university contributed. A lot of those I didn't know about. But one thing that I can't help but think about, and not to divert from like the strength-based thing, but is that while they're offering those programs, they're also contributing the university is contributing really heavily to the gentrification and further marginalization of the local people, buying up land, getting rid of grocery stores so that we can only buy from their markets, overpriced markets, and buying up land for student housing that would have otherwise been affordable, driving up the rent prices because students need them, so locals can really live in town.
Students need them and can pay for them.
Yeah, and that kind of thing. So it's interesting to see that dichotomy of like reaching out and helping, but also like pushing them away at the same time, and how they can, I wonder how the university is considering that.
I don't have the answer to that, although I know that that is a present conversation with a lot of people right now, and probably has been for a long time, that tension. Any other comments, or any comments about that? Do we want to do, oh, yeah.
So I'm not from Athens, I'm from Chillicothe. What is your peanut butter and jelly program?
Sure. So the peanut butter and jelly program started when I was a school social worker at Trimble, and about 65 to 70% of children at that school qualified for free and reduced lunches. And so we saw that children, come summer, were not getting 2 out of 3 of the meals that they were getting during the school year, because they were getting free breakfast and free lunch at school. And so the principal and I said we really need to do something about this, because we know that children are going home and going hungry for 3 months out of the year. And so we met with some local leaders, someone from Community Action, someone from Job and Family Services, and sat down and kind of brainstormed and decided that peanut butter and jelly was, it's a staple. It was shelf stable. It was something that children could prepare for themselves. It's pretty nutritious. It has protein and carbs. And so we decided to roll out a peanut butter and jelly project. And what we did was the first year we had $100 and donations from the food pantry. And we bought peanut butter and jelly and distributed to families. I would set up with my station wagon outside of the school, and folks would come and pick up a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly for each child in their family for each week for 6 weeks. After that, we expanded to another school district, and then it expanded to all the school districts in the county with a lot of fundraising. There's a 5K that, who's it, Kelly, the Athens Philanthropic
Athens Foundation, like young
something. They do a 5K every year for it.
Professionals for Philanthropy.
There you go.
Right?
Nice, yes. They do a 5K every year. We put, Athens County Children's Services puts out donation boxes all over the place now. And it's also supplemented with fresh fruits and vegetables, and sometimes even dairy. So what happened was it met a need, right? So, I know what I was going to say. For families that could not get to the school to pick up, I would deliver, because I knew the families that really struggled, who were in rural areas that just could not spend the gas money to get into town. So it met a real need, and I think that when we think about programming, that's when you know things are successful, right? Is when they can take off, and that you're really you're recognizing what the problem is, and you can step back, and it grows. And so it's something I'm really proud of, and it's something that's really, really easy to replicate in other counties, because everybody has eaten peanut butter and jelly in their life unless they had an allergy, right? And so it somehow pulls at people's heartstrings, or is, that kind of sentimental piece of it has really helped it resonate with people. And so it's an easy pitch. And I've heard that it's being replicated in some other counties. So I think you could call someone at Athens County Children's Services, and they could talk to you about what they're doing now around it and how they fund it and all that. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, but I think it's a pretty easy sell every year that they're
It is. It gets bigger and bigger every year. We have so many donations. It's crazy. And then the school outreach workers, something else they've been added to that, is some of the kids in the community help participate in giving out the peanut butter and jelly. So it's kind of that mentoring piece too, and they really enjoy that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Great example of how we can get kids connected to adults doing good things, right? Anything else? Yeah.
I just had a question. So, in this area, it can be kind of overwhelming with all the different needs. So, what is the best way that you found to kind of get a general survey of the biggest needs, and then to develop some action behind those? I know that's a really big question.
That is a big question. I just truly believe in spending quality time with people and listening. I mean, that is, I think, the most basic thing that we can do. But when you develop relationships, you really get to understand what life is like. And so, like, I value things like home visits, for example, because you do really get to see what's going on. So I think being a good listener and being a problem solver and being really creative and open and remembering that, like, things don't have to stay this way, right? Like, we are change agents, and so that means change at all the different levels, not just on an individual level. I think that's a little bit abstract, but I think that's probably what my biggest lesson has been, is developing relationships with people. I can't stress that enough. So, and showing that you have integrity and that you're willing to sling peanut butter and jelly out of the back of your car when it's 100 degrees out, or, you know, do things that people value. People in this community really value seeing you work hard or kind of go the extra mile sometimes. And so when they see that, I think that they're more ready to be vulnerable with you. Someone had a question back here. Yeah.
Kerri, did you say that your position at Trumbull was funded by a grant to bring in school social worker?
My original position in Marietta was funded by the McKinley Act for homeless children, I believe. So that was through the Department of Education a million years ago. Now the funding goes, the funding for Athens County goes through Children's Services from a levy. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I know I've attended just a handful of public schools and some in Ohio, and I have never seen school social worker. Maybe the closest thing we've had is a guidance counselor, and their scope of function pretty much covers just like college preparation. Anything further, there was nothing.
It doesn't always make it into the budget, unfortunately.
So that's good to know.
What advice can you share about finding sustainable funding sources?
Sustainable, it's like what we're always chasing, right? I think the most important part is to not create programs based on the funding that's out there. Like, create programs because it's what your community needs. And when that happens, you get the support, right? Like, the Peanut Butter and Jelly Project is not grant funded. It's supported by the community. So I think, which is not really an answer to your question, but I get really frustrated when we're chasing the money rather than really looking at our community needs and going from that perspective. Yeah.
So I'm wondering which legislation, if any, surrounding this issue would you support or oppose, like surrounding like the risk and resiliency, or anything out there? Or if there's not, what would you, not to put you on the spot, like what would you write in order to?
Well, I did a lot of research around this, and I was telling Dr. Garlington, the Affordable Care Act and Medicaid expansion, I read a really interesting article that I can share with you all, but it's basically empathy written into legislation, which I thought was a really interesting perspective. And so I think really supporting Medicaid expansion in our state and making sure that whoever becomes the governor, that we hold their toes to the fire on that, because it does make a difference, and especially in our communities. And yeah, I mean, transportation, it affects all those domains, right? Like, for people to live healthy lifestyles, they've got to have what they need. And in our area, Medicaid is a big part of that. Erin.
Do you think that the opioid epidemic has affected the risk and resiliency of Appalachia? Yeah. So, like, do you think it's harder to find mentors now?
Ooh, I don't know about that question as far as mentoring. I think they're more important than ever, because I think children have, oftentimes kids have a lot of adults who are really suffering in their lives. And so being able to see alternatives is important. I don't know, does anyone else who's kind of on the ground have a comment about that? Like, what are you seeing as far as getting people engaged with agencies? Because I mean, I think there's a lot of fear around the opioid epidemic, but I don't know that it's affecting willingness to engage with children, you know? Like, it's usually...
Like
And I think people are just realizing there's more of a need. Like, I know my county has put through levies that I thought they were having difficulty with before because of that need. And so I think communities are realizing that it's hopefully driving more initiatives to connect with kids. But I think it's also probably harder to get to some of those kids, so it's really important to have those programs that connect people.
And when you think about like the foster care system just exploding, and that sometimes that's a group of kids that might not be getting those resources, for example, because they're kind of sometimes transient and don't have as stable of a place all the time. But I think if there's one thing that I would leave you all with, it's that if there's a way for you to have a meaningful relationship with a child in this community, and a child who's maybe living in poverty, and you've thought about it before, I would encourage you to figure out a way to make it happen, because it does make a difference. And like all of us shared our stories about where we came from, and most of you had a significant adult in your life, like you can be that person for someone. So that's my takeaway. We had a case scenario, we didn't do it, but if you have questions, or you'd like links to the articles, I can share those too. Oh, this is a really neat model that I did want to just mention, and it's called a community school. So a community school is basically a school that has gone from the traditional old-style rotary phones that nobody knows how to use anymore to a mobile phone that's like, basically wraparound services are happening at the school. And so a lot of our schools are already doing some of this. So it's a pretty interesting model, but I encourage you that if this is an interesting topic to you, to kind of dig in deeper to that model and see what all they're doing. And thank you.